Welcome to the Stillness Broadcast. Tonight we have 5 stories that will settle into your mind like fog over still water. These are tales of ordinary people who discovered that reality isn't quite as stable as we believe. Get comfortable, let the world outside fade away, and allow these stories to wash over you. Let's begin. Story 1. I never believed my grandmother when she told me about the passengers. She'd been driving the same stretch of Highway 14 for 40 years, through the Nebraska plains where towns are separated by miles of nothing but corn and sky. She said that sometimes late at night people would appear in her back seat. Not hitchhikers she'd picked up. Just there, suddenly, as if they'd always been riding with her. They never speak, she told me when I was 16, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug in her kitchen. They just sit there, looking out the window like they're searching for something, and when you check the mirror again, they're gone. I smiled and nodded, the way you do when elderly relatives tell stories that bend too far from reality. Grandmother had always been eccentric, living alone in that farmhouse after grandfather died, refusing to move to town despite her children's concerns. The passenger stories were just another oddity to add to her collection. That was 10 years ago. Last month, grandmother had a stroke. She survived, but the doctors said she couldn't live alone anymore. My mother asked me to drive out to the farmhouse and pack up her things since I was between jobs and had the time. I agreed, thinking it would take a weekend at most. The drive from Omaha took 4 hours. I left at noon, planning to arrive with plenty of daylight left. But I'd forgotten how distances deceive you in Nebraska, how the flatness makes everything look closer than it is. By the time I pulled into grandmother's driveway, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint had faded to gray, and several shutters hung at odd angles. The porch sagged in the middle, and I made a mental note to watch my step. I grabbed my overnight bag and the key my mother had given me. Inside, the house smelled of old fabric and dust. I turned on lights as I moved through rooms, checking to make sure everything was secure. The furniture sat exactly where it had always been, covered now in a fine layer of dust that made me sneeze. Family photographs lined the walls, faces frozen in moments decades past. I made myself dinner from the canned goods in the pantry, ate at the kitchen table where grandmother had told me about the passengers, then settled in for the night. The plan was simple. Tomorrow I'd start sorting through her belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate. It would take a few days, maybe a week if I was thorough. I was nearly asleep in grandmother's guest room when I heard it. The sound of a car, engine distant but approaching. I sat up, listening. We were miles from the main road, and the driveway was long enough that you could hear vehicles coming from far away. The engine grew louder, then stopped. I waited for a knock at the door, for some indication of who had arrived at this isolated farmhouse at 10 o'clock at night. Nothing came. I got out of bed and looked out the window. Grandmother's old sedan sat in the driveway where it had been since she went to the hospital. No other vehicles were visible. The yard was empty, illuminated by a moon so bright I could see the individual stalks of corn in the nearby field. The silence pressed against my ears. I stood at the window for 5 minutes watching for movement, but nothing stirred. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined the sound or heard a distant tractor from one of the neighboring farms. I went back to bed. Sleep came slowly. The house made the usual settling noises old buildings make, creaks and groans that I told myself were perfectly normal. I was almost unconscious when I heard the car door slam. This time, I was certain. The sound was unmistakable, that particular thunk of a car door closing firmly. I got up and went to the window again, my heart beating faster now. The sedan sat exactly where it had been. No movement, no lights, nothing to indicate anyone had touched it. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, went downstairs and outside onto the porch. The night air was cool and smelled of earth. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere far away, a dog barked. I walked to the sedan and checked the doors, all locked just as they'd been. I circled the vehicle, shining my light into the windows. The interior was empty except for the usual contents: a sun-faded map book in the door pocket, a small pile of receipts on the passenger seat, a blanket folded on the back seat for emergencies. Nothing had changed. I went back inside, locked the door, and returned to bed, feeling foolish. Old houses made strange sounds. Rural areas played tricks on your perception. There was nothing to worry about. But sleep wouldn't come now. I lay in the darkness, listening to the house breathe around me, and found myself thinking about grandmother's stories. The passengers who appeared in back seats. The ones who never spoke, just looked out windows like they were searching for something. At midnight, I heard the engine start. This time, I didn't hesitate. I threw off the covers and ran to the window. The sedan sat in the driveway, completely dark and motionless. But I could hear it clearly now, the distinctive rumble of its old engine, the sound I'd heard thousands of times during childhood visits when grandmother would drive me into town for ice cream. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but there was no signal. I'd forgotten how spotty coverage was out here. I was completely alone, miles from the nearest neighbor, listening to a car engine that couldn't possibly be running. The sound continued for exactly 3 minutes, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, weighted with expectation. I stood at the window, my breath fogging the glass, and watched the sedan. That's when I saw her. A woman stood beside the driver's side door, looking up at the house. She wore a long dress that might have been fashionable in the 1950s, and her hair was styled in victory rolls. Even from the second floor, I could see that something was wrong with her face. It was too pale, almost luminous in the moonlight, and her features seemed somehow flat, like a photograph instead of a three-dimensional person. She raised one hand and waved at me. Not a friendly wave, but a slow, deliberate gesture, like someone flagging down a car on a dark highway. Then she opened the car door and climbed into the back seat. I watched, frozen, as she settled herself and closed the door behind her. Through the rear window, I could see her silhouette, sitting perfectly still, facing forward. My hands shook as I backed away from the window. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I was tired, stressed about grandmother, imagining things in the dark. That's all this was. But the woman remained in the back seat of the sedan, visible through the window, motionless as a mannequin. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the guest room with every light on, door locked, and waited for dawn. The woman never moved from her position in the back seat. I checked every hour, looking out the window, and she was always there, sitting in the same position, staring straight ahead through the windshield. When the sun finally rose, I looked again. The back seat was empty. I went downstairs, made coffee with shaking hands, and tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare. A vivid, stress-induced nightmare that felt real in the moment, but couldn't possibly have happened. Then I went outside to the sedan. The back seat was empty, as I'd known it would be, but something was different. The blanket that had been folded neatly yesterday was now spread across the seat, as if someone had tried to make themselves comfortable. And on the passenger side window, in the condensation that had formed overnight, someone had drawn a simple picture, a road stretching toward a horizon, and a small stick figure standing beside it. I should have left then, should have thrown my belongings into my car, and driven straight back to Omaha. But I was my grandmother's granddaughter, stubborn and curious in equal measure. I wanted to understand what I'd seen, needed to know if the stories had been true all along. I spent the day going through grandmother's belongings, trying to focus on the task at hand, but my mind kept returning to the woman in the back seat. Her pale face and slow wave. In the early afternoon, I found grandmother's journals. She'd kept them for decades. Simple composition, notebooks filled with her neat handwriting. I sat at the kitchen table and started reading, looking for any mention of the passengers. I found it in a journal from 1972. The passenger appeared again tonight. Same stretch of Highway 14, mile marker 47. A man this time, middle-aged, wearing overalls. He was there when I checked the mirror at 11:15 p.m. and gone by 11:20. He looked sad, the way they all do, like they've lost something precious and don't remember what it was. I flipped through more entries, found dozens of similar accounts spanning decades. Different passengers, different times, but always on Highway 14, always appearing and disappearing without explanation. Grandmother had documented them methodically, noting the date, time, location, and description of each one. The last entry was from 2 weeks before her stroke. I think I finally understand. They're not ghosts, not really. They're people who got lost between places. The road goes on forever here, straight and empty, and some people just keep driving, forgetting where they started or where they're going. Eventually, they become part of the road itself, permanent passengers searching for an exit that doesn't exist. I see them more often now, sometimes 3 or 4 in a single night. I think they know I'm almost ready to join them. I closed the journal, my mouth dry. Grandmother hadn't been confused or senile. She'd been documenting something real, something that had been happening on these roads for as long as she'd been driving them. That night, I decided to drive Highway 14. I know this sounds insane. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to get in my car and leave. But I needed to know. Needed to see if the passengers would appear for me the way they'd appeared for grandmother. I got into the sedan around 10 p.m., using the keys I'd found in grandmother's kitchen drawer. The engine started immediately, despite sitting unused for weeks. I pulled out of the driveway and headed for Highway 14. The road was empty, as I'd expected. This wasn't a major road, just a 2-lane highway connecting small towns that time had mostly forgotten. I drove slowly, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, watching the backseat. Mile marker 47 passed. Nothing happened. I drove for another 10 miles, turned around and drove back. Still nothing. The back seat remained empty. The road remained deserted. I felt both relieved and disappointed. Then, at mile marker 47, exactly where grandmother had noted the most frequent appearances, the woman from last night was suddenly standing by the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering. She stood in the grass beside the highway, her 1950s dress rippling slightly in the wind. She was looking directly at me, and now that I was closer, I could see what was wrong with her face. It wasn't flat because it was two-dimensional. It was flat because it had no expression at all, no humanity behind the eyes. She raised her hand in that slow wave again. Before I could react, before I could decide whether to drive away or stop. She was in the back seat. I didn't see her get in. She simply wasn't there, and then she was, sitting in the same position as last night, facing forward, hands folded in her lap. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The passenger sat behind me, perfectly still, close enough that I could see her clearly in the rearview mirror. She was looking at me now, her expressionless face tilted slightly to one side. Her eyes were pale, colorless, like windows into empty rooms. "Where are you trying to go?" I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. She didn't respond, didn't blink, just stared at me with those empty eyes, and I understood then what grandmother had meant. This woman wasn't searching for a specific destination. She had forgotten what she'd been searching for, had forgotten everything except the endless road and the need to keep looking out windows, watching mile markers pass, hoping something would eventually seem familiar. I wanted to tell her I was sorry, that I wished I could help her. But before I could find the words, she was gone. One moment she was in the back seat, the next the space was empty again, as if she'd never been there at all. I drove home in a daze, parked the sedan, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the empty back seat in the mirror. Grandmother had been right about everything. The passengers were real, and they were trapped, endlessly riding in back seats, searching for something they could no longer remember. Over the next week, as I packed up grandmother's belongings, the passengers appeared 7 more times. Different people, different eras, but all with the same empty eyes and expressionless faces. An old man in a worn suit, a teenage girl in a prom dress, a young boy who couldn't have been more than 8. They appeared, sat silently for a few minutes, then vanished. I documented them in grandmother's journal, continuing her work. I described each one, noted the time and location, tried to honor the duty she had taken on decades ago. On my last night in the farmhouse, as I was loading the final boxes into my car, I saw movement in the sedan. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat now, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield. I walked closer, my heart in my throat, and recognized her immediately. Grandmother sat behind the wheel, looking exactly as she had in her prime, before age had bent her spine and clouded her eyes. She turned her head and looked at me through the window, and her face held the same empty expression as all the others. She had become what she'd spent 40 years documenting, another lost passenger on Highway 14. But then, just before she faded, her expression changed. For just a second, recognition flickered in her eyes and she smiled. Not the empty smile of the lost, but the warm, real smile I remembered from childhood. She mouthed 3 words. "Keep them company." Then she was gone. I understood then what she meant. The passengers weren't dangerous. They weren't trying to harm anyone. They were just lost, and they needed someone to see them, to acknowledge that they were still here in some form, still traveling these endless roads. I didn't go back to Omaha. I called my mother and told her I'd decided to stay in grandmother's farmhouse for a while. She was surprised but supportive, glad someone was taking care of the property. Now I drive Highway 14 most nights, just like grandmother did. The passengers appear regularly, sitting in the back seat, looking out windows, searching for something they've forgotten. I don't speak to them anymore. I've learned they can't respond. But I check the mirror. I see them, and I make sure they're not completely alone in their endless journey. Sometimes, late at night, when the road is empty and the moon is bright, I catch glimpses of grandmother. She appears in the passenger seat, young and whole, and she looks over at me with those warm eyes. She never stays long, always fades within moments. But I know she's watching, making sure I'm doing the work right, carrying on the duty she held for 40 years. The passengers need witnesses, someone to see them, to remember them, to ensure they're not completely forgotten as they drift through an eternity of searching. It's a strange inheritance, but it's mine now. Every night, I drive Highway 14, and I wait for them to appear. And when they do, when I see their pale faces in the rearview mirror, I do what grandmother did. I keep them company. I let them know that someone sees them, that someone remembers they're still here. It's not much, but for the lost passengers of Highway 14, it's everything. Story 2. The apartment building at 1247 Ashwood Drive had been vacant for 3 years when I moved in. Not the entire building, just apartment 4C. Every other unit had tenants who came and went with normal frequency, but 4C sat empty despite being one of the nicest units in the building, with large windows overlooking the park and original hardwood floors. "Why hasn't anyone rented it?" I asked Marcus, the building manager, during my initial tour. He hesitated, keys jangling in his hand. "People don't stay long, usually break their lease within a week, say it doesn't feel right." "What does that mean?" "You know how some places just feel off? Like that." He unlocked the door and pushed it open. "But hey, if you can last a month, I'll take $200 off your rent. Standing vacancy is costing the owner money." I should have recognized this as a warning, but I was desperate, recently divorced and working remotely, needing a quiet place I could afford. The discount sealed the deal. I moved in on a Tuesday in March. The apartment was exactly as Marcus had described. Spacious, clean, well-maintained. The previous tenant had left it spotless, and the one before that, and presumably all the others who'd broken their leases. Whatever made them uncomfortable hadn't left any physical evidence. The first 3 days were perfect. I set up my workspace in the spare bedroom, arranged my furniture, and settled into a routine. The building was quiet, my neighbors polite but reserved. The kind of place where people kept to themselves. I worked during the day, made dinner in the evening, and slept soundly in the large bedroom overlooking the park. On the 4th night, I heard the walking. It started around 2 a.m., pulling me from deep sleep. Footsteps directly above me, crossing from one end of the ceiling to the other. Not heavy footsteps, but deliberate, measured, like someone pacing slowly. They would reach one wall, pause for a few seconds, then return in the opposite direction. I lay in bed listening, trying to orient myself. The apartment above mine was 5C. I'd seen the tenant once, an elderly woman who moved with a walker. These footsteps didn't match that image. They were too steady, too regular. The pacing continued for 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly. Silence rushed back in, thick and absolute. I eventually fell back asleep, convincing myself I'd been half dreaming. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same pattern, footsteps crossing directly above me, pausing at the walls, returning. I got up and stood in my bedroom, tracking the sound. The steps seemed to follow the same path exactly, never deviating, like someone walking an invisible track. In the morning, I knocked on 5C. The elderly woman, Mrs. Chen, answered after a long moment. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said. "I live below you in 4C. I've been hearing footsteps at night and wanted to make sure everything's okay." Her expression changed immediately, her face closing off. "I don't pace at night. I barely move from my bed once I'm in it. My hip, you understand." "Of course, I just thought—" "You're in 4C?" she interrupted, looking at me more carefully now. Yes, I moved in earlier this week. She studied me for a moment, then shook her head. I can't help you. Whatever you're hearing, it's not coming from my apartment. She closed the door, politely but firmly. I stood in the hallway, confused by her reaction, the way her face had changed when I mentioned my apartment number. That evening, I met my neighbor from 4D in the hallway. James was in his 30s, worked in finance, had lived in the building for 5 years. "You're in 4C?" he asked when I introduced myself. "Brave. What does that mean?" He glanced at the door to my apartment, then back at me. "People don't last there, usually less than a week. Something about it bothers people. I tried asking the previous tenant what drove her out, but she just said she needed to leave and wouldn't explain further. Have you heard anything strange? Footsteps from 5C late at night?" James frowned. "Mrs. Chen is in 5C. She's practically immobile. And besides," he paused, "5C doesn't sit directly above 4C. The building layout is offset. What's above your bedroom is actually the hallway between 5C and 5D. This made no sense. I could clearly hear the footsteps above my bed, tracking from one end of the ceiling to the other. If that was just a hallway, why would someone pace there for 20 minutes every night? "Who uses that hallway, I asked. "Just Mrs. Chen and Mr. Patel from 5D. But I've never seen either of them out late at night. Mrs. Chen can barely walk, and Mr. Patel is a sound sleeper. I know because his apartment is next to mine, 1 floor up." I thanked James and went back to my apartment, disturbed by this information. That night, I set up my phone to record audio while I slept, hoping to capture evidence of the footsteps. At 2 a.m., I woke to the familiar sound. I grabbed my phone, stopped the recording, and immediately played it back. On the recording, there was nothing but silence. I could hear my own breathing, the ambient hum of the refrigerator, traffic sounds from the street, but no footsteps. Yet I could hear them right now, clear as day, pacing above me. I was recording and the phone captured nothing. I went to my bedroom door and opened it, stepped into the hallway. The footsteps above me continued, audible even here. I took the stairs to the 5th floor, moved quietly down the hallway between apartments C and D. The hallway was empty and silent. No footsteps, no movement. I stood directly where the sound should be coming from, held my breath, and listened. Nothing. But when I returned to my apartment and stood in my bedroom, the footsteps were still there, pacing their regular path. This made no logical sense. Sound couldn't work this way, existing in one location but not another. Yet that seemed to be exactly what was happening. Over the next week, the footsteps continued every night at 2 a.m. I tried earplugs, white noise machines, sleeping in the spare bedroom. Nothing helped. When I was in the apartment at that hour, I heard them. Clear, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. I started sleeping poorly, waking before 2 a.m. in anticipation, lying awake listening to the pacing. It always lasted exactly 20 minutes, never more or less. The same route, the same rhythm, the same pauses at each end. On day 12, something changed. The footsteps started at 2 a.m. as usual, but this time they were slower, more deliberate, and after a few minutes they stopped moving. They just stopped, directly above my bed. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence that felt heavier than sound. The footsteps didn't resume. Whoever or whatever was up there was standing still, positioned exactly above where I lay. Then I heard a new sound, a slow creak, like weight shifting on old floorboards. Except the floor above me was concrete, same as mine. Concrete didn't creak. The creaking continued, rhythmic now, back and forth, like someone rocking on their heels. Standing above me, rocking slowly. for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. This lasted for 5 minutes. Then the footsteps resumed, completed their usual route, and stopped. I didn't sleep that night, lay awake until dawn, then immediately contacted Marcus. "I need to break my lease," I told him. He sighed. "What happened?" "The footsteps. Every night at 2 a.m. They're directly above my bedroom, but there's nothing up there except a hallway, and no one's walking in it, and my phone doesn't record them, even though I can hear them clearly." "You lasted 12 days. That's actually longer than most." He didn't sound surprised by anything I'd said. "I'll process the paperwork, but you won't get your deposit back. You signed a year lease." "I don't care about the deposit. I need out." "Fine. You have until the end of the month to move." 2 weeks? I could survive 2 more weeks. That night, the pattern changed again. The footsteps started at 2 a.m., but this time they didn't stop above my bed. They stopped at my bedroom door. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the door. It was closed, locked from the inside. The footsteps were definitely on my side of the threshold now, in my hallway, not in the ceiling. They'd somehow descended. A shadow moved under the door. Someone was standing right outside my bedroom. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. The shadow remained, breaking the thin line of light from the hallway. Something was there, blocking the light, standing completely still outside my room. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. The shadow didn't move. I waited, hardly breathing, for something to happen. The shadow remained for 3 minutes by my phone's timer, then withdrew. The footsteps resumed, walking down my hallway into my living room, and then silence. I didn't leave my bedroom until dawn. When I finally opened the door, the apartment was empty, exactly as I'd left it. No signs of entry, nothing disturbed. Both the front door and windows still locked from the inside. That's when I started researching the building's history. It didn't take long to find the information. 5 years ago, a woman named Sarah Vance had lived in 4C. She'd worked from home, like me, and rarely left the apartment. Her neighbors barely saw her, and when they did, she seemed anxious, distracted. She'd called the police once, reporting an intruder in her apartment. Officers responded, found no evidence of forced entry, and concluded she'd been mistaken. 2 weeks later, she called again with the same complaint. Again, no evidence. The third time she called, dispatch noted in their records that she sounded extremely agitated and possibly experiencing a mental health crisis. They sent a wellness check team along with police. They found her apartment empty. Sarah Vance had vanished. Her belongings were still there, her phone and wallet left behind, but she was gone. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. She simply disappeared from a locked apartment. The case remained unsolved. After a year, her family cleared out her belongings, and the apartment was re-rented. Every tenant since had broken their lease within days or weeks, all complaining of strange noises, feelings of being watched, a general sense that something wasn't right. I was the latest in a line of tenants who'd experienced something in 4C, something that had started happening after Sarah Vance disappeared. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, waiting for 2 a.m. The footsteps started on schedule, but this time they began in my living room. Right where I was sitting, I watched in horror as they crossed the floor toward me, each step accompanied by a soft sound against the hardwood, though I could see nothing making them. They approached my chair, stopped directly in front of me, and I felt it then. A presence, close enough that the air seemed to thicken. that my breath fogged despite the room's warmth. "Sarah," I whispered. The temperature dropped dramatically. My breath came out in clouds now, and frost began forming on the windows despite the mild night outside. The footsteps moved again, walking past me toward the bedroom. I followed at a distance, watching as my bedroom door slowly swung open, though no hand touched it. The footsteps entered my bedroom, crossed to the window, and stopped. I heard that creaking sound again, the slow rocking, as if someone was standing by the window, looking out at the park below. I forced myself to enter the bedroom, to approach the window where the invisible presence stood. Looking down, I could see the park clearly in the streetlight's glow. The walking paths, the benches, the small fountain in the center. And then I understood. Sarah Vance hadn't just disappeared from her apartment. She'd been pacing every night, disturbed by something, standing at this window, looking out at the park. She'd called the police about an intruder, but they'd found nothing because the intruder wasn't physical. It was something else, something that manifested as footsteps and presence, something that drove her to such desperation that I looked down at the pavement below the window. The fall from the 4th floor would be fatal. Sarah hadn't disappeared. She'd jumped, or been pushed, or been driven to jump by whatever presence had tormented her night after night, the same presence now tormenting me. The footsteps moved away from the window, back through the apartment, following their nightly route. I followed them, watching as they traced the same path Sarah must have paced night after night, trying to escape, looking for a way out. They stopped at the front door. I heard the creaking again, that slow rocking, as if someone was standing there, hand on the doorknob, trying to decide whether to leave. "You can go," I whispered to the empty air. "You don't have to stay here." The door's deadbolt turned slowly, metal sliding with a quiet click. The door opened 6 inches, stopped, then closed again. The deadbolt locked. The footsteps resumed, walking back through the apartment, entering the bedroom, returning to the window. The pattern repeated over and over, faster now, more frantic. Living room to bedroom, bedroom to door, door to window, window to living room. Around and around, trapped in an endless loop. I understood then what I was hearing every night. Not just footsteps, a memory, an echo, a recording of Sarah's final nights played over and over. She'd paced these paths, stood at these points, trying to decide between the door and the window, between escape and surrender. And in the end, she'd chosen the window. The footsteps were still going, faster and faster now, racing through the apartment, and I couldn't bear it anymore. I grabbed my car keys, threw some clothes in a bag, and left. I walked out of 4C and didn't look back. I called Marcus from a hotel that night and told him I was breaking the lease immediately, that I'd forfeit everything. I didn't care. He didn't argue, just said he'd process the paperwork. "For what it's worth," he said. "I'm sorry. The owner keeps trying to rent it, hoping someone won't notice. But they always do. Always within 2 weeks. What about Sarah Vance? Did the police ever figure out what happened?" Long silence. "How did you know about Sarah?" "I looked it up. She lived there 5 years ago. She disappeared. The police ruled it suicide," Marcus said quietly. "Evidence suggested she jumped from the bedroom window, but her body was never found, which is strange, because that's a busy area. Someone should have discovered it immediately. Unless she jumped and somehow, I don't know, kept going, like the footsteps that never stopped, that paced the same routes endlessly, trapped in their pattern. I never went back to 4C, The building sent my belongings to storage, and I found a new apartment across town. I don't drive past Ashwood Drive anymore. Don't want to see that building or the windows of 4C looking out over the park. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I hear them. Soft footsteps pacing in the empty room above me, even though I'm on the top floor of my new building. Walking their circuit, pausing at invisible walls, trying to decide between the door and the window. And I wonder if Sarah Vance is still trying to leave, still standing at that window, still trapped in those final moments before she jumped, or fell, or was pushed by something that's now following me. Story 3. The inheritance was unexpected. I barely knew my Uncle Theodore, had only met him twice at family gatherings where he sat in corners and spoke to no one. He lived alone in a farmhouse in rural Vermont, and when he died at 83, I was somehow named in his will as the sole heir to his estate. The lawyer's call came on a Thursday morning. Mr. Theodore Ashworth has left you his property and all associated contents. There's one condition. You must spend 7 consecutive nights in the house before claiming ownership. If you don't, the estate goes to the Historical Society. Why 7 nights? The will doesn't specify, but those are the terms. You have 6 months to fulfill the condition, or the property transfers automatically. I was between jobs, between relationships, between everything. 7 nights in a Vermont farmhouse seemed like a reasonable price for property that, according to the lawyer, included 80 acres and a house built in 1847. I drove up on a Saturday in October. The fall colors were at their peak, and the winding road through the mountains was breathtaking. I almost missed the turnoff to Uncle Theodore's property, a narrow dirt driveway marked by a weathered mailbox with Ashworth barely visible. The house appeared through the trees like something from a Gothic novel. 3 stories of gray stone, narrow windows, a tower on the west corner that seemed both architectural and defensive. The property had been maintained but not modernized. No satellite dish, no visible electrical lines, and when I got closer, I saw there were no power lines running to the house at all. The front door was unlocked, key left under the mat per the lawyer's instructions. I pushed it open and stepped into a foyer that smelled of old wood and older paper. The interior was frozen in time. Furniture from multiple eras crowded the rooms. Victorian chairs alongside mid-century modern lamps, colonial cabinets next to Art Deco mirrors. Every surface held objects, clocks, music boxes, photographs in elaborate frames, porcelain figurines, leather-bound books. But it was organized, obsessively so, everything arranged with mathematical precision, grouped by type or era, each item exactly aligned with its neighbors. The effect was overwhelming, a museum curated by someone with too much time and increasingly specific sorting criteria. I found a note on the dining table in handwriting I recognized from Uncle Theodore's rare Christmas cards. The items must not be moved. This is important. They have their places. Sleep in the second floor bedroom on the east side. Do not enter the tower. 7 nights. Then everything is yours. The bedroom he'd indicated was surprisingly comfortable. A large 4-poster bed, clean linens, a window overlooking the forest. I unpacked my supplies, made dinner in the ancient kitchen using the working fireplace, and settled in for the night. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of ticking. Not a single clock, but hundreds of them, all slightly out of sync, creating a cascading rhythm that filled the entire house. Tick, 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 tock, tock, tick. An endless pattern that should have been chaos, but somehow resolved into something almost musical. I got up and walked through the second floor. Every room held clocks, mantel clocks, grandfather clocks, wall clocks, pocket watches under glass. I hadn't paid attention before, but now I realized there must be hundreds of them throughout the house, and they were all running, all keeping slightly different time, all ticking away in their individual rhythms that somehow, impossibly, harmonized. I went back to bed, but the ticking followed me, vibrated through the walls and floors. It should have been maddening, but instead it was oddly soothing, like listening to rain on a tin roof or waves on a shore. I fell asleep to the sound and didn't wake until dawn. The second night, I heard the music boxes. They started around midnight, a delicate tinkling melody from somewhere on the first floor. I went downstairs and found one of the music boxes open, its mechanical ballerina turning slowly. I hadn't opened it. I was certain of that. As I watched, another music box opened across the room. Then another. Within minutes, a dozen music boxes were playing simultaneously, their melodies overlapping and interweaving. Like the clocks, they should have clashed, but instead they created something beautiful, a complex arrangement that no single composer could have written. I reached for the first music box to close it, then remembered Uncle Theodore's note. The items must not be moved. I left them playing and returned to bed, where the combined sound of ticking clocks and music boxes accompanied me into uneasy sleep. The third night, the photographs changed. I'd noticed them during the day, hundreds of framed photographs covering every available wall space. Family portraits, landscapes, pictures of people I didn't recognize in clothing spanning 2 centuries. Uncle Theodore had been an obsessive collector of old photographs, apparently purchasing them at estate sales and antique shops. But on the third night, when I walked through the house, the photographs were different. The people in them had moved. Not drastically, but subtly. A man who'd been looking at the camera was now looking to the left. A woman's hand that had been at her side was now raised slightly. A child who'd been standing had taken a single step forward. I told myself I was imagining it, that I simply hadn't looked carefully enough before. But the changes continued throughout the night. Every time I checked a photograph, the subjects had shifted position again. Always slightly, always towards something or away from something, as if the frozen moments were slowly melting, time resuming its flow within the frames. By morning, many of the photographs showed their subjects at the very edge of the frame, about to step out of the picture entirely. I wanted to take them down, turn them to face the wall, but Uncle Theodore's note was clear. The items must not be moved. The fourth night, I heard the voices, whispers at first, coming from every room, as if the house was holding dozens of simultaneous conversations just below the threshold of comprehension. I moved through the floors, trying to locate the source, but the whispers seemed to emanate from the objects themselves. The clocks whispered in time with their ticking. The music boxes whispered between notes. The photographs whispered through glass and wood. Hundreds of voices, all speaking at once. None of them saying words I could distinguish, but all of them urgent, insistent, trying to communicate something I couldn't quite grasp. I stood in the center of the second-floor hallway, surrounded by Uncle Theodore's collections, and the whispers crescendoed into something almost intelligible. Almost words, almost meaning. Then they stopped, all at once, plunging the house into silence that felt aggressive after so much sound. In that silence, I heard one clear voice from the tower. "Don't enter!" Uncle Theodore's voice. I was certain of it, though I'd heard him speak only a handful of times decades ago. He was warning me, reminding me of his written instruction. I hadn't been tempted to enter the tower before. Now I was overwhelmingly curious. The fifth night, the objects began moving on their own. Small movements at first. A clock sliding an inch to the left. A music box rotating slightly on its shelf. The Victorian chairs in the parlor shifting position, angling toward the center of the room as if preparing for a conversation. I watched from the doorway as the entire house slowly rearranged itself. Not chaotically, but with purpose, each object finding a new position in some pattern I couldn't perceive. The clocks grouped by size, then by era, then by something else I couldn't identify. The photographs reorganized themselves on the walls, creating new arrangements, new relationships between images. By midnight, the house looked completely different, yet still obsessively organized. Every item had found a new place, and those places seemed somehow more correct than before, as if Uncle Theodore's arrangement had been a rough draft, and this was the final version. The tower door stood ajar. I was certain it had been closed before. Certain Uncle Theodore's note had said not to enter, but the door was open now, revealing stairs spiraling upward into darkness. "Don't!" Uncle Theodore's voice whispered from somewhere in the house. "Not yet." One more night, I closed the tower door and went to bed, though sleep came slowly. The house was settling into its new arrangement, and I could hear objects shifting, adjusting, finding their perfect positions. The whispers continued all night, and the people in the photographs moved continuously now, walking through their frames, some disappearing entirely, while others emerged from edges they'd never been near before. The sixth night, I finally understood. Uncle Theodore appeared at the foot of my bed around 2 a.m. Not a ghost, not exactly. More like a presence wearing the memory of a physical form, translucent and flickering like an old film projection. "Thank you for staying," he said. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away, or from the objects themselves speaking in unison. "I couldn't do this alone." "Do what?" "Sort them, organize them. They arrived over decades, and I tried to arrange them properly, but I could never quite get it right. They need to be in perfect order before they can rest." "They? The objects?" "The moments," he corrected. "Each object is a captured moment, a clock marking the time when something important happened, a music box playing the melody someone hummed in their last hour, a photograph preserving someone's final expression. I collected them because I could hear them calling, all these moments desperate to be remembered, to be kept, to be arranged in their proper sequence. And now, they're almost ready. 6 nights of adjustment, learning how to move, finding their places. Tomorrow, the 7th night, they'll complete the pattern. Then they can finally rest. And so can I." He faded as he spoke, his form dissolving back into the darkness. On the 7th night, I stayed awake. At midnight, the house began to move in earnest, every object shifting, floating, rearranging. The clocks lifted from their shelves and positioned themselves in a spiraling pattern through all 3 floors. The music boxes followed, creating a second spiral, interweaving with the first. The photographs flew from the walls and arranged themselves into a vast 3-dimensional collage, each image connected to others by invisible threads of meaning. The whispers became words, became stories, became the accumulated history of every moment these objects had witnessed. I heard wedding vows and deathbed confessions, heard lullabies and war cries, heard laughter and screaming and everything in between. The objects were organizing themselves chronologically, I realized, but not by their creation, by the moments they contained, arranging themselves into a timeline of human experience, every second accounted for, every memory preserved, spanning back centuries to that first clock, that first photograph, that first music box playing its mechanical tune. And at the center of it all, in the eye of this spiraling storm of moments, the tower door opened. Uncle Theodore stood in the doorway, solid now, corporeal, no longer flickering. Behind him, I could see stairs spiraling not up but down, descending into what should have been the basement, but looked more like a void, an absence. The space between all moments. The collection is complete, he said. Every moment I could find, properly organized. Now they can all move forward, can finally flow into whatever comes next. And you? I was the anchor, keeping them here, preventing their progression. Now you've witnessed the arrangement, confirmed the pattern. You can take over, or you can let them go. What happens if I let them go? He smiled sadly. Then they flow forward into the nothing, and these objects become just objects again, empty. And this house becomes just a house. But if you stay, if you become the new anchor, you'll hear them always. New moments will call to you, begging to be collected, to be sorted, to be added to the archive. It's not an easy life, but it's important work. Someone has to remember. I thought about my empty existence, the lack of purpose that had defined the last few years. And I thought about all these moments, these preserved fragments of human experience, crying out not to be forgotten. I'll stay, I said. Uncle Theodore nodded, stepped aside, and one by one the objects flowed past him into the tower, down the stairs, into the void. The clocks ticked their way into darkness. The music boxes played their final notes. The photographs showed, their subjects taking that last step forward, finally leaving their frames. It took hours. When the last object had descended, the tower door closed, and Uncle Theodore faded one final time, this time without returning. The house was empty now, just walls and floors and windows. No collections, no arrangements, no whispers. I was completely alone. Then I heard it, a single tick from somewhere far away, a moment calling out, asking to be found, to be preserved, to be given its proper place in the infinite archive of human experience. I gathered my keys and went to find it. That was 3 years ago. The house has filled again, though not to Uncle Theodore's level. I'm more selective, only collecting moments that truly need keeping. The clocks tick their individual times, the music boxes play their melodies, the photographs capture their subjects in frozen instants. And when someone visits, when they fulfill whatever conditions I write into my will, they'll hear the whispers, see the movements, understand that these aren't just objects. They're the memories we can't let go, the moments too precious to lose, all waiting in careful arrangement for the day they can finally rest. Until then, I keep sorting, keep organizing, keep listening for the next moment that needs to be saved. It's lonely work, but Uncle Theodore was right. Someone has to remember. Story 4. I found the notebook in my daughter's backpack 3 weeks before she went missing. Emma was 13, in that difficult phase where she was too old for childhood but unprepared for adolescence. She'd always been quiet, but lately she'd become withdrawn, spending hours in her room with the door closed, speaking in monosyllables when I asked about her day. I shouldn't have looked through her backpack. I know that. But she'd left it on the kitchen table, and when I moved it, something fell out. A composition notebook with a black cover, the kind students use for school assignments. I picked it up, intending to just put it back. But it fell open to a page covered in my daughter's handwriting. Not her usual neat script, but something more frantic, letters cramped and overlapping. They don't notice, that's what makes it work. She comes to school, sits in my seat, answers questions in my voice, and nobody notices because she's learned me perfectly. But I can see her from here, and she's making mistakes. Small ones, but mistakes. Soon someone will realize she's not me. Soon they'll ask where the real Emma is. I flipped back to the beginning of the notebook. The first entry was dated 6 weeks earlier. I saw her today for the first time. She was standing across the street from our house, watching my bedroom window. She looked exactly like me. Same hair, same clothes, same everything. But I could tell she wasn't real, because she didn't blink. She just stood there staring, and I watched her for 10 minutes, and she never blinked once. The entries continued chronologically, each one describing another sighting of this doppelganger. She appeared at Emma's school, in the grocery store, at the park, always watching, always motionless, always perfect, except for small tells. Not blinking, not breathing visibly, standing too still. Then 2 weeks into the entries, the tone changed. She's getting closer. Yesterday she was in our driveway. Today she was on the porch. Tomorrow she'll be inside. I know this because I can feel her intention. She doesn't want to hurt me. She wants to be me. And the only way to do that is to take my place completely. I flipped through more pages, my hands shaking. The entries became more desperate, more paranoid. Emma described setting up barriers, testing her parents and friends with questions only the real Emma would know, leaving marks on her own body that the doppelganger couldn't replicate. The second to last entry was dated 3 days ago. She's in my room at night now. I wake up and she's standing beside my bed, learning my sleep patterns, watching how I breathe. Soon she'll know me well enough to make the switch. Soon I'll be the copy, and she'll be the original. I don't know how to stop it. Mom and Dad don't believe me. Nobody believes me. They all say I'm stressed about school, about growing up, that I'm making up stories for attention. But she's real. She's here, and she's going to take everything. The final entry was yesterday. Today is the day. I can feel it. She's ready now. She knows me completely. My voice, my walk, my laugh, my fears, everything. Tonight, when I go to sleep, she'll make the switch. I'll wake up and I won't be me anymore. I'll be her, watching myself live my life. I'm writing this so there's evidence, so someone might understand what happened. Please, if you're reading this, look closely at Emma. Look for the mistakes. Look for the proof that she's not real, because the real Emma will be stuck somewhere else, watching, unable to do anything but witness her own life being lived by someone else. I closed the notebook, my heart racing. This was clearly fantasy, the product of adolescent anxiety and an overactive imagination. Emma had always been creative, prone to elaborate stories. This was just another one. But when I looked up, Emma was standing in the kitchen doorway watching me. "Hi, Mom," she said, and smiled. Normal voice, normal smile, everything perfectly ordinary. But something made me look closer, made me pay attention in a way I hadn't before. She wasn't blinking. "Emma, are you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I'm fine. Why?" Still smiling, still not blinking. "Your eyes, don't they hurt?" She blinked then, a slow, deliberate motion, as if she just remembered she was supposed to. "They're fine, Mom. Can I have my backpack?" I handed it to her, watched her take it, and turned to leave. Her movements were fluid, natural, exactly how Emma moved. But there was something in the way she held herself, a stillness underneath the motion, like watching a video of a person rather than the person themselves. She was almost out of the room when I said, "Emma, what did you have for breakfast?" She paused, turned back. "Toast with peanut butter, same as always." "And what's your favorite teacher this year?" "Mr. Harrison, English." Still the same neutral expression, the same slight smile. These were correct answers. Emma did eat toast with peanut butter most mornings, and she did like Mr. Harrison. But something about the way she said it felt off, like she was reciting information rather than remembering it. "Honey, are you feeling all right? You seem different." "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired. I'm going to do homework." She left before I could ask anything else. I stood in the kitchen, holding a notebook full of paranoid fantasies, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. Emma was going through a phase. The notebook was creative writing, not a diary. Everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just spoken to someone who looked like my daughter but wasn't. That evening at dinner, I watched Emma carefully. She ate normally, answered her father's questions about school, helped clear the table afterward. Everything was perfectly ordinary, except she was still barely blinking. And when she did, it seemed forced, conscious. "Emma, sweetie, are you wearing contact lenses?" I asked. "No, why?" "Your eyes just seem dry. Maybe you should see the doctor." "They're fine, Mom." A flash of something in her expression. Irritation. Anxiety. It passed too quickly to identify. After dinner, she went upstairs to her room. I waited 20 minutes, then followed, listening at her door. Silence. Complete silence. No music. No keyboard clicking. No sounds of movement. Just absolute quiet. I knocked. "Emma?" "Yes?" Her voice came immediately. No pause. "Can I come in? I'm busy with homework. I'll just be a minute." "Mom, please, I need to concentrate." I opened the door anyway. Emma sat at her desk, perfectly positioned, book open in front of her, pencil in hand. She turned to look at me with that same slight smile. "I asked you not to come in," she said. "I'm your mother. I wanted to check on you." "I'm fine. I'm always fine now." The way she said "now" sent chills down my spine. "What does that mean?" "Nothing, Mom. Can you please leave?" I backed out of the room, closed the door, and stood in the hallway with my heart pounding. Something was wrong. Something was profoundly wrong. But what could I do? Call the police and tell them my daughter was too still, too polite, that she wasn't blinking enough. I went back to the kitchen and reread the notebook, looking for any clue about what Emma believed was happening. The entries were consistent in their description. The doppelganger watched, learned, and eventually replaced. But where did the original go? I found my answer in an entry I'd initially skipped over. I've been reading about this. It's called the exchange. The replacement doesn't kill the original. They can't because they need the original to keep existing. Instead, they trap the original in a kind of in-between place. Not here, not there, just watching, aware of everything but unable to interact. The original sees their life continue without them, watches the replacement make small mistakes, watches everyone accept the fake as real. It's a special kind of torture. I put the notebook down and called my husband into the kitchen. "David, I need you to look at something." I showed him the notebook, explained what I'd found, what I'd noticed. He read a few pages, then looked at me with concern. "Olivia, this is clearly creative writing. Or maybe Emma's struggling more than we realized and needs to see a therapist. But you can't seriously think." "Watch her," I interrupted. "Just watch her carefully. Pay attention." We went upstairs together. Emma's door was still closed. David knocked. Emma, can you come out for a minute? Your mom and I want to talk to you. The door opened immediately. Emma stood there, perfectly composed. Yes? Sweetie, we're a little concerned. Your mom found this notebook and... He trailed off, clearly unsure how to proceed. Oh, that! Emma's expression didn't change. It's just a story I'm writing. For English class. Mr. Harrison said we should write about our fears, explore dark themes. I've been reading a lot of horror lately, so none of it's real. You don't actually think someone's impersonating you? Of course not, Dad. That would be crazy. She smiled, and it was Emma's smile, exact and perfect. Can I go back to my homework now? Sure, honey. Sorry to bother you. She closed the door. David looked at me with an expression that said, See? Everything's fine. But I'd noticed something during that brief exchange. Emma had been standing in the hallway, and the light from her bedroom had cast her shadow on the wall behind her. Or should have. I'd seen her shadow earlier that day. Seen it move normally. Behave the way shadows do. This time, there was no shadow. The girl standing in the doorway, wearing Emma's face and Emma's clothes, cast no shadow at all. I waited until David was asleep, then got up and went to Emma's room. The door was locked from the inside. I knocked softly. Emma, are you awake? No answer. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for breathing, for any sound of sleep. Nothing. The room was silent as a tomb. Emma, if you're in there, if you can hear me, I know something's wrong. I know you're not you. Please, give me a sign. Anything. Still nothing. I stood there for 10 minutes, waiting, hoping. Then I heard it. A single tap from inside the room. Not from the floor where Emma would be, but from the window. I ran outside, looked up at Emma's second-floor window. Nothing visible. But as I watched, condensation formed on the glass from the inside, and in that condensation, letters appeared, traced by an invisible finger. Help, then the condensation faded, and the window was clear again. I spent the rest of the night researching doppelgangers, changelings, anything that might explain what was happening. Most of what I found was folklore, mythology, stories meant to explain the unexplainable. But some sources took the phenomenon seriously, treating it as a genuine occurrence with consistent patterns. According to these sources, the replacement process took time. The doppelganger needed to learn every detail of the original, every mannerism and memory. The learning period could last weeks or months, but once the exchange was complete, the replacement was perfect and irreversible. There was one exception. If someone who loved the original could prove the fake was fake, could point out a mistake or inconsistency that others acknowledged, the exchange would fail. The doppelganger would vanish, and the original would return. The catch was that it had to be convincing proof, something undeniable, something that even the replacement couldn't explain away. I watched the thing wearing Emma's face for the next 2 days, cataloging every tiny error. She forgot to tie her shoes the way Emma did, left over right instead of right over left. She drank orange juice at breakfast when Emma always chose apple. She laughed at a joke Emma wouldn't have found funny. But when I pointed these things out to David, to Emma's friends, to her teachers, they all had explanations. People change their habits. Preferences shift. Maybe she was trying something new. No one else saw what I saw because they weren't looking closely enough, or because they didn't want to see. It's easier to accept small changes than to question reality itself. On the third day, I found another notebook in Emma's room when the replacement was at school. This one was hidden under the mattress, started more recently. The handwriting was different, shakier, desperate, written by someone under extreme stress. Mom, if you're reading this, I'm still here. I can see you. I can see everything. I'm trapped in a place that's exactly like our house but empty. No people, no sounds, just rooms and furniture, and me. I can see through windows into the real world, can watch the fake living my life. She's good at it, better than I expected. She makes mistakes, but nobody notices. Nobody except you. I see you watching her. I see you trying to prove she's not me. Please keep trying. Please don't give up. Because if everyone accepts her as me, if nobody questions it, I'll be stuck here forever, watching my own life continue without me. There were more entries, each more desperate than the last. Emma described her prison in detail. A perfect copy of our house and neighborhood, frozen in time, empty of all life except her. She could move through it freely, but couldn't escape it. Couldn't make sounds that anyone in the real world would hear. Couldn't interact with anything physical. The final entry was dated yesterday. She's almost perfect now. The mistakes are getting smaller. Soon there won't be any at all, and then even you will stop noticing. Please, Mom, I'm running out of time. I'm forgetting things about myself, losing details that she's absorbed. It's like she's slowly erasing me, even from my own memory. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I looked up from the notebook, and the replacement was standing in the doorway of Emma's room, watching me. You shouldn't read my private things, Mom, she said. You're not Emma. Yes, I am. I've always been Emma. No, Emma ties her shoes differently. Emma doesn't like orange juice. Emma would never describe her own journal as my private things. She'd call it her diary. The replacement tilted her head, studying me. People change, Mom. I'm growing up. Don't I have the right to be different from how I was? Not like this. Not all at once. Not in ways that erase who you fundamentally are. She smiled. And this time, it wasn't Emma's smile at all. It was something else. Something that wore Emma's face, but had never been human. You can't prove it, she said. You can point out differences, but you can't prove I'm not your daughter. And eventually you'll stop noticing the differences. You'll accept me, like everyone else has. You'll forget what Emma was really like, and I'll be the only Emma you remember. Where is she? Where's my real daughter? Close by, watching, waiting for someone to save her. The replacement moved closer. Her movements too smooth, too fluid. But no one will, because I'm perfect now. I've learned everything. There's nothing left of her that I don't know. Everyone makes mistakes, I said, backing away. Even perfect copies. Do they? Watch. Me, Mom, watch me closely. See if you can find a single error. Over the next week I watched. I documented every interaction, every gesture, every word. I took videos on my phone, hoping to capture some glitch, some moment where the facade would slip. But the replacement was right. She was perfect. She went to Emma's school, hung out with Emma's friends, did Emma's homework. She laughed at appropriate times, cried at sad movies, argued about screen time exactly the way Emma would have. She was my daughter in every observable way, and I felt Emma slipping away from me. Not physically, she was still trapped somewhere, still watching, but from my memory, I was starting to forget the exact sound of her real laugh, the particular way she used to tilt her head when thinking. The replacement's versions were overriding my memories, replacing the original with her copies. One night, I stood in Emma's doorway, watching the replacement sleep, or pretend to sleep. I still wasn't sure she actually needed rest. I know you're not Emma, I whispered, I'll always know. The replacement's eyes opened, though she didn't move otherwise. "Will you? How long can you hold on to memories that no one else shares? How long until you question yourself? Until you decide you must have been wrong? That the small differences you noticed were just in your imagination? I won't forget. I'm her mother. Even mothers forget, given enough time. And I have time, Mom. All the time in the world." I started seeing Emma everywhere after that. Glimpses in mirrors, reflections in windows, shadows that moved wrong. The real Emma, still trapped, still trying to reach out. She'd leave messages in the condensation on the bathroom mirror, arrange objects in patterns I'd recognize, anything to remind me she was still there. But the replacement explained everything away. The messages were just random patterns, the arranged objects merely coincidence. And slowly, others started looking at me with concern, wondering if I was okay, if the stress of Emma's difficult phase was taking a toll on me. Yesterday, David sat me down for a serious conversation. "Olivia, I'm worried about you. You've been obsessing over Emma, watching her constantly, claiming she's different. But honey, she's just growing up, changing, becoming her own person." "She's not Emma," I said, but even I could hear how weak it sounded now. "Listen to yourself. You're suggesting our daughter has been replaced by... what? An imposter? A clone? Do you understand how that sounds?" I didn't answer, because he was right. It sounded insane. Without proof, without evidence anyone else could see, I was just a paranoid mother unable to accept her daughter's normal development. This morning, I found one final message from Emma, written in dust on the underside of her bed frame, where only someone deliberately looking would find it. "Mom, it's okay to let go. She's won. But I need you to know something. I'm still me, even here, even trapped. And I'll keep being me, keep holding on to who I am because you taught me to be strong. I love you. Please try to be happy." I'm writing this down now, before I forget completely, before the replacement's version of Emma overwrites everything. I want there to be a record, evidence that I knew, that I tried. My daughter Emma is trapped somewhere between here and nowhere, watching a perfect copy live her life. And I can't save her, can't even prove she needs saving. The thing that wears her face will keep getting better, and I'll keep forgetting the differences. Soon I won't be able to tell them apart at all. Soon I'll accept the replacement as real, and the original Emma will fade into nothing but a collection of inconsistent memories that I'll eventually dismiss as my own confused imagination. But I'm writing this now, while I still remember, while I still know the truth. My daughter is not my daughter, and somewhere, the real Emma is screaming in silence, watching her mother forget her. Story 5. The call came at 2 a.m, pulling me from dreams I immediately forgot. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the brightness. "Dr. Chen?" The voice was male, professional, urgent. "This is Officer Martinez with Seattle PD. We have a situation that requires your expertise. Can you get to Virginia Mason Medical Center within the hour?" I was a forensic psychologist, sometimes consulted on unusual cases, but a 2 a.m. call was unprecedented. "What's this regarding?" "A patient was brought in 3 hours ago. She's been speaking continuously since arrival, hasn't paused for breath, and the content..." He hesitated. "We need someone to assess whether it's confession or psychosis." "Speaking about what?" "That's the problem, doctor. She's describing murders. 17 of them, in precise detail. Locations, methods, victims. We're checking the information now, and so far..." Another pause. "So far, it's all accurate." I was fully awake now. I'll be there in 40 minutes. The hospital was quiet when I arrived. That particular stillness of night shifts and emergencies long stabilized. Officer Martinez met me in the lobby, tall, exhausted, with the look of someone who'd seen something they couldn't explain. Before you talk to her, he said as we walked toward the secure wing, you need to understand what you're walking into. She hasn't stopped speaking for 4 hours. Not for water, not for bathroom breaks, not for anything. The words just keep coming, and we're recording all of it. What's her name? She won't say. No ID, no purse, nothing. She was found wandering I-5, barefoot, in a hospital gown. When the patrol car picked her up, she was already speaking. They brought her here thinking she was an escaped patient, but no facility in the region is missing anyone matching her description. We reached a room at the end of the corridor. Through the window, I could see a woman in her 30s, average height, brown hair, sitting perfectly upright in bed. Her mouth moved continuously, and even through the closed door, I could hear a faint murmur of voice. One more thing, Martinez said. She's not looking at anything. Her eyes are open, but she's not seeing. The doctors checked. She's physiologically awake, but neurologically it's more like she's dreaming. Conscious REM state, they called it. They've never seen anything like it. I took a breath and entered the room. The voice washed over me immediately, a steady stream of words without pause or inflection. The woman didn't acknowledge my entrance, didn't shift her gaze, just continued speaking in a monotone that somehow managed to be both compelling and deeply unsettling. The third victim was Margaret Holloway, age 47, kindergarten teacher in Bellingham. She died on October 15, 2019, in her home on Cascade Street. The method was asphyxiation using a plastic bag secured with duct tape. Time of death was approximately 8:30 p.m. The perpetrator entered through the rear door, which the victim habitually left unlocked. The body was discovered 3 days later by her sister. The perpetrator removed no items from the home and left no physical evidence. The investigation concluded after 6 months with no suspects identified. I sat down across from her, watching carefully. Her eyes were indeed open but unfocused, pupils dilated despite the room's bright lights. She breathed normally between words, never gasping or pausing, the flow of speech perfectly calibrated to her respiratory rate. The fourth victim was James Kwan, age 62, retired accountant in Tacoma. He died on January 3, 2020, in his apartment on South 18th Street. The method was blunt force trauma to the back of the skull using a ceramic lamp base. Time of death was approximately 7:15 p.m. The perpetrator was admitted to the building by another resident returning home. Mr. Kwan opened his door believing the perpetrator to be a delivery person. The body was discovered the following morning by building maintenance. The investigation remains open, with no significant leads. I listened for 15 minutes, recording her words, taking notes on her physical presentation. She never blinked. Her hands remained folded in her lap, motionless. Only her mouth moved, mechanical and precise. "How long have you been listening?" I asked, not expecting a response. The fifth victim was Rosa Martinez, age 34, nursing assistant in Seattle. She died on March 20th, 2020, in the parking garage of Swedish Medical Center. The method was stab wounds to the torso using a kitchen knife with a 4-inch blade. Time of death was approximately 11:45 p.m. following her shift. The perpetrator waited in the garage for 1 hour and 17 minutes before the victim arrived. The body was discovered by security at approximately 1:30 a.m. The investigation identified no suspects despite extensive security footage review. Martinez entered the room, handed me a tablet. On screen were police reports, actual case files matching the woman's descriptions. Margaret Holloway, James Kwan, Rosa Martinez, all real victims, all unsolved murders, all described with accuracy that shouldn't have been possible. "We're up to 5 confirmed matches," Martinez whispered. "The details are exact. Things never released to the public. We're checking the rest now." I looked at the woman still speaking, still motionless except for her lips forming words that detailed horror after horror. The 6th victim was Daniel Park, age 29, software engineer in Redmond. He died on May 7, 2020, in his apartment on 106th Avenue Northeast. The method was overdose induced by the forced administration of fentanyl. Time of death was approximately 3:20 a.m. The perpetrator entered through a bathroom window left open for ventilation. Mr. Park was unconscious from alcohol consumption. The staging of the scene suggested suicide. The investigation concluded after 3 months with the death ruled accidental. "Has anyone tried to stop her?" I asked Martinez. "To interrupt the flow. Doctors tried. Physical touch, loud noises, even mild sedatives. Nothing breaks the pattern. She just keeps talking. They're worried about dehydration, but she can't drink while speaking." I watched the woman's throat, saw it working constantly. 4 hours of continuous speech without water would be causing damage. 6 hours, 8 hours. She'd need medical intervention soon. The 7th victim was Alice Winters, age 58, librarian in Olympia. She died on July 22, 2020, in the parking lot of Thurston County Library. The method was vehicular homicide staged as hit and run. Time of death was approximately 6:45 p.m. The perpetrator waited in a stolen vehicle and accelerated when the victim crossed behind it. The vehicle was recovered 3 days later, burned, in a wooded area near Yelm. The investigation remains open with no suspects. This was my 8th hour listening. 3 shifts of officers had rotated through. Doctors had attempted IV hydration, but she wouldn't remain still enough for insertion. Her voice had grown hoarser, but the words continued, relentless and precise. 13 murders confirmed now, all real, all unsolved, all described with details only the killer could know. The 8th victim was Marcus Freeman, age 41, high school basketball coach in Seattle. He died on September 9th, 2020, in his car in the parking lot of Garfield High School. The method was strangulation using a nylon cord. Time of death was approximately 10:20 p.m., following an evening practice. The perpetrator entered the vehicle from the rear while the victim checked his phone. The body was discovered the following morning by the assistant coach. The investigation identified no suspects, though several students reported seeing an unfamiliar car in the lot that evening. I leaned forward, studying her face for any sign of consciousness beyond the speech. "Can you hear me? Are you aware I'm here?" No response. Just the continued litany of death. The 9th victim was Patricia Wong, age 67, retired teacher in Bellevue. She died on November 14, 2020, in her home on Northeast 8th Street. The method was poisoning using antifreeze mixed with apple juice. The victim consumed the mixture over several days, believing it to be her usual evening beverage. Time of death was approximately 4:30 a.m. following 3 days of progressive symptoms. The body was discovered by her daughter during a wellness check. The investigation identified no suspects, and the death was initially ruled natural until toxicology results revealed poisoning. Martinez brought me coffee, his face gray with exhaustion. 17 confirmed now. All real cases, all accurate. FBI is getting involved. They want to know if she's confessing or if someone's feeding her information. She's not conscious enough to be fed information. And look at her throat. The physical toll is severe. This isn't voluntary. Then what is it? I didn't have an answer. In 20 years of forensic psychology, I'd never encountered anything like this. The 10th victim was Robert Chen, age 55, commercial airline pilot in Seattle. He died on January 8, 2021 in a hotel room near SeaTac Airport. The method was suffocation using a pillow while the victim slept. Time of death was approximately 4:15 a.m. The perpetrator accessed the room using a universal keycard obtained from housekeeping. The body was discovered at noon when the victim failed to report for his scheduled flight. The investigation identified no suspects, though hotel surveillance showed an individual matching the perpetrator's description entering and exiting the building. 12 hours now. The woman's lips were cracked and bleeding. Her voice had degraded to a rasp. Doctors were preparing for forced intervention, but legal considerations complicated the situation. She was technically under arrest, suspected of 17 murders, and any medical procedure without consent opened complex legal questions. The 11th victim was Sarah Mitchell, age 32, graphic designer in Tacoma. She died on March 19, 2021, in her apartment on South 72nd Street. The method was overdose induced by contaminated heroin. The victim was not a habitual drug user. The substance was introduced to her home by the perpetrator posing as a delivery person. The victim's curiosity and recent emotional distress made her vulnerable to experimentation. Time of death was approximately 11:50 p.m. The body was discovered by her roommate the following morning. The investigation concluded with the death ruled accidental drug overdose. I tried a different approach. Tell me your name. Who are you? The flow didn't stop. Didn't even hiccup. The 12th victim was Thomas White, age 49, construction foreman in Everett. He died on May 27, 2021, at a construction site on Broadway Avenue. The method was fall from height, staged as industrial accident. The perpetrator loosened safety harness equipment during the victim's lunch break. Time of death was approximately 2:30 p.m. when the harness failed during routine work. The body was recovered by emergency services. The investigation concluded the death was accidental, attributed to equipment failure and inadequate safety protocols. FBI arrived at hour 16. Special Agent Carver watched the woman for 10 minutes before pulling me aside. "We've confirmed all 17, she said. "These are all real murders, all unsolved, all described with details that were never made public. This woman either committed these murders or is somehow accessing confidential case files. But Dr. Chen," she paused. "The geographic spread is massive. Seattle, Tacoma, Everett, Olympia, Bellingham. These murders happened over 2 years in different jurisdictions, different methods. If one person committed all of them, it would make them one of the most successful serial killers in Washington state history," I finished. The 13th victim was Monica Silva, age 27, restaurant manager in Seattle. She died on July 9th, 2021, in the alley behind her workplace on First Avenue. The method was blunt force trauma using a metal pipe. Time of death was approximately 11:30 p.m. while taking out trash. The perpetrator waited in the alley for 40 minutes. The body was discovered minutes later by kitchen staff. The investigation remains open with no significant leads despite multiple witnesses reporting an individual matching the perpetrator's description in the area. "We need her to stop talking," Agent Carver said. "Need her conscious and able to be questioned. Have the doctors made any progress?" "She's not responding to anything. It's like she's locked in a dissociative state, and the only output is this confession. If that's what it is, could be something else. Someone using her to communicate. Some kind of breakdown where she's channeling information she's absorbed." I shook my head. "She's not receiving information. This is coming from inside her, from memory. These are first-person recollections, however they got there." The 14th victim was Gregory Larson, age 63, retired police officer in Seattle. He died on September 18th, 2021, in his home on Queen Anne Avenue. The method was gunshot wound using the victim's own service weapon. The perpetrator entered through an unlocked garage door and surprised the victim in his study. Time of death was approximately 9:45 p.m. The staging suggested suicide, and the investigation initially concluded as such until forensic analysis revealed the angle of entry was inconsistent with self-infliction. The case remains open with no suspects. At hour 20, she began to deteriorate rapidly. Her voice was barely audible, her breathing labored. The bleeding from her lips had increased, and her body temperature was elevated from the exertion. Doctors made the decision to intervene, inserting an IV despite her continued speech, and attempting to slow her down with sedation. The medication took effect gradually. Her speech slowed, words stretching out, but still she continued. The 15th victim was Linda Walker, age 44, elementary school principal in Renton. Even drugged, the confession continued, just slower, each word a struggle. She died on November 7th, 2021, in her car, in the parking lot of Highland Elementary. I watched her eyes, saw them finally start to close. The medication was winning. The method was carbon monoxide poisoning, using a hose from exhaust to window. Her eyes closed fully. The words became mumbles. Perpetrator accessed vehicle during victim's lunch hour. Death occurred approximately 2:15 p.m. Silence. For the first time in 20 hours, she stopped speaking. We all waited, holding our breath. Doctors monitored her vitals. She was sleeping now, deeply, her body finally able to rest. "That's only 15, Martinez said. "She said 17 at the beginning." Agent Carver checked her notes. She described the first 12 in detail, then 13 through 15. "We're missing 2 victims." I stared at the woman, now peacefully unconscious. "Maybe those 2 haven't been found yet." The implications settled over us like a heavy fog. When she woke 6 hours later, she was different. Her eyes focused immediately on me, fully conscious, fully aware. "Where am I?" Her voice was rough, damaged from the prolonged speech. "Virginia Mason Medical Center. You were brought in last night. You've been speaking for 20 hours straight." Confusion crossed her face. "Speaking about what?" "Murders. 17 murders that you described in precise detail. All real cases, all unsolved." She stared at me, and I saw genuine fear in her eyes. I don't remember speaking. I don't remember any murders. The last thing I remember is going to sleep in my apartment 3 days ago." "What's your name?" "Emma Reeves. I'm a paralegal. I live in Capitol Hill. I went to bed Thursday night. And now I'm here, and you're telling me... She trailed off, trying to process. I described murders? Yes. All real, all unsolved. Do you have any knowledge of these cases? Any professional connection? No, I work in family law. Divorces, custody. I don't have access to criminal case files. I don't understand what's happening. Agent Carver entered the room. Ms. Reeves, I'm Special Agent Carver with the FBI. We need to ask you some questions about the information you've been providing. I didn't provide anything. I don't know anything. Emma's hands were shaking now. Please, I don't understand what's happening. How did I get here? Why can't I remember? We questioned her for hours. She had no memory of the 20-hour confession, no knowledge of the victims, no connection to any of the cases. Background checks revealed exactly what she'd claimed: a paralegal living a quiet life, no criminal record, no indicators of violence or deception. She's telling the truth, I said to Agent Carver in the hallway. Her confusion is genuine. Whatever happened during those 20 hours, she wasn't conscious for it. Then how did she know details that only the killer could know? I don't know. We kept Emma hospitalized for observation. She was cooperative, desperate to understand what had happened to her. Psychiatric evaluations revealed no dissociative disorder, no schizophrenia, no condition that would explain the episode. 2 days later, it happened again. I was sleeping at home when Martinez called. She's speaking again. Started at 2 a.m., same as before. Same monotone, same pattern. I arrived at the hospital to find Emma in the same state, conscious but unseeing, speaking continuously without pause. The 16th victim was Christopher James, age 38, technology consultant in Seattle. He died on January 11th, 2022, in his office on 5th Avenue. The method was poisoning using digitalis extracted from foxglove plants, administered through coffee over several visits. Time of death was approximately 6:20 p.m. following progressive cardiac symptoms. The body was discovered by building security. The investigation initially suspected natural causes until toxicology revealed poisoning. The case remains open with no suspects. Agent Carver stood beside me, recording every word. This is describing a new victim. We're checking now, but if it's accurate, it means the killer is still active, I said. And somehow using Emma to communicate. Or Emma is the killer and has multiple personalities. I shook my head. I've been evaluating her for 2 days. There's no evidence of DID, no lost time beyond these episodes, no personality switching. This is something else. Emma spoke for another 8 hours before the sedation took effect. When she woke, she again had no memory of the episode, no awareness of what she'd revealed. Why is this happening to me? She asked, tears streaming down her face. I'm not a killer. I've never hurt anyone. Please, you have to believe me. I do believe you, I said. But someone is using you to confess to these crimes, and we need to understand how. The 16th victim checked out. Christopher James was real, found dead in his office, toxicology pending, but now fast-tracked. The details Emma had provided were accurate. One victim left. Number 17. We waited, kept Emma under constant observation. She was terrified now, afraid to sleep, afraid of what might come out of her mouth when she lost consciousness. 3 days passed. Then, at 2 a.m. on the 4th night, it began again. I was already at the hospital, having taken up residence in a room near Emma's. Martinez called me when her speech started. The 17th victim was Emma Reeves, age 33, paralegal in Seattle. She died on February 6th, 2023, in Virginia Mason Medical Center, The method was overdose using medication from the hospital pharmacy, administered through her IV line while she slept. Time of death was approximately 2:15 a.m. The perpetrator accessed her room using a stolen access card and introduced the medication into her IV bag. The death was initially ruled natural, a complication of her psychiatric condition, until blood tests revealed the foreign substance. The investigation remains open with no suspects identified. I ran to Emma's room, my heart pounding. She sat up in bed, still speaking, describing her own murder. But the rest of the room was empty. No intruder, no one near her IV line. The perpetrator had been planning this death since Emma Reeves began recounting the previous murders. The perpetrator could not allow the confessions to continue, could not risk Emma remembering the transfer of consciousness that occurred during her sleep. The perpetrator eliminated the vessel before the vessel could understand what it had become. A conduit for confession, a witness the killer could not allow to exist. I checked Emma's IV bag. Clear fluid, no signs of tampering. Called for nurses, for security, for Agent Carver. The perpetrator waited in the room with Emma Reeves as she described her own death, watched her recount details that had not yet occurred, observed the paradox of a confession delivered before the crime. The perpetrator understood that this was the end, that the compulsion to confess had found its final outlet, that after Emma Reeves died, the need to speak would die with her. Emma's eyes closed. Her speech slowed as sedation from hours earlier finally took effect. The perpetrator watched Emma Reeves sleep and felt relief that soon the voice would stop. Her last words were barely a whisper, and the perpetrator stood in the corner of the room, invisible, patient, waiting to complete what had been foretold. Silence. We searched the room immediately. No one else was present. No evidence of intrusion or tampering. Emma's vitals were stable. But I couldn't shake what she'd said. The perpetrator stood in the corner of the room, invisible, patient. I looked at the corners, at the shadows, at the empty spaces where no one stood. "Get her out of this room," I told Martinez. "Transfer her to a secure facility. Armed guards, no one in or out without authorization." "You think someone's really going to try to kill her?" She just described her own murder, in detail, and said the killer was waiting in this room. We moved Emma that morning. She woke with no memory of the third episode, no knowledge that she described her own death. "I want to go home," she said. "Please. Whatever's happening, I want it to stop. I want to go back to my normal life." "You're not safe," I said. "Someone is using you to confess to 17 murders. We don't know how or why, but we know you're in danger." "From who?" "There's no one here but doctors and police and you. That's what we're trying to figure out." But we never did. 3 days later, despite constant surveillance, despite armed guards and locked doors, Emma Reeves died in her secure room. The cause of death was overdose. Medication that shouldn't have been accessible was found in her system. No explanation for how it was administered. No suspects. No evidence of entry or tampering. Her death was exactly as she described it during that final episode. The investigation remains open. All 17 murders she described were real. All are still unsolved. The killer was never identified. But sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I think about Emma's final words. The perpetrator stood in the corner of the room, invisible, patient. And I wonder if killers can become ghosts before they die. If guilt can manifest as a compulsion so strong it finds vessels to voice confession. If Emma was chosen randomly or specifically. I wonder if the perpetrator is still out there, still killing, still looking for someone to speak through. And I wonder if the voice will come again, finding another vessel, describing more murders in that same monotone. 18, 19, 20. The confessions that no one asked for, delivered by mouths that don't know what they're saying. Somewhere, a killer walks free. And somewhere else, maybe, another voice is beginning to speak in the night, recounting deaths that haven't been discovered yet. But this time, I won't be there to listen. I can't. Not anymore. Because I've started dreaming in that voice, started waking with words in my mouth that I don't remember thinking. And I'm terrified that one night, I'll start speaking, and I won't be able to stop. That brings us to the end of tonight's journey through the dark. Thank you so much for staying with me through these 5 tales. I hope they've given you exactly what you came for, that perfect blend of mystery and unease. If tonight's stories resonated with you, I'd be deeply grateful if you'd subscribe to the Stillness broadcast. There are many more stories waiting to be told, many more mysteries to explore together. Your support means everything. Until tomorrow night, rest well. Let these stories settle into your mind like snow falling on quiet fields. And remember, the world is stranger than we usually allow ourselves to see. Sweet dreams, my friends. The Stillness broadcast will be here waiting when you return.